On Monday, the 4th of November, ABC's Q&A had a panel of outspoken feminists, self-labelled, and it's since been removed from iView after complaints that it promoted violence, which it did, and it did so quite explicitly. But I watched large sections of that episode soon after I heard about it because I wanted to try and understand what it was that was making these women tick. In particular, Egyptian-born feminist Mona El-Zahawi, who promoted the violence most explicitly and said the really controversial stuff. Let me read you some quotes just so you get in the picture. She says this, I travel the world, she says, to say F the patriarchy. Now, the whole evening was full of foul language from her. It's just one of the tactics that she uses, as she explains later. She says that the West is ruled by white, supremacist, capitalist, imperialist patriarchy. She gives examples of that, including Trump and Scott Morrison, and she calls them white, supremacist, fascist dictators. She says at the heart of the way they rule is violence. It is meted out to you depending where in the hierarchy you belong, going on to say that the people who experience the violence are transgendered people, women, black people, etc. When she's challenged about her own constant profanity and calls to unruly behaviour, she says words like respectability, civility and decorum were invented by white men to benefit white men in systems and institutes for white men. And they weren't designed for people like you and me, people of colour, women and gender diverse people. They never imagined people like us in those spaces, and we show up and just ruin it for them. For those who say be polite, I have a whole chapter on the political importance of profanity. So it's just weird. I mean, apparently respectability, civility and decorum is not a female thing. It's just a male thing, a white man thing, and somehow that's oppressive. I'll get to that later. She says, for me as a feminist, the most important thing is to destroy the patriarchy. And then there's this, she says, all of this talk about, well, if you talk about violence, you're just becoming like the men. I'm going to answer that with another question. How long must we wait for men and boys to stop murdering us, to stop beating us, to stop raping us? How many rapists must we kill? Not the state, because I disagree with the death penalty, and I want to get rid of incarceration. So as a woman, I am asking how many men must we kill until men stop raping us? Just note that. As a woman, I am asking, how many men must we kill? You can understand why this was removed from iView. She says, and not the state, I as a woman. She said, I do not have the luxury or the privilege to sit with people who do not acknowledge my full humanity. I refuse. Now, I want to notice a few things about this. The first thing that I want to point out is that this is a worldview, for it surely is, this is a Marxist, feminist, kind of postmodernistic worldview, to pull a few of those words into the word salad, but that's where she's coming from. It's a power structure worldview. It is all about power, and it's about power at all costs. It doesn't matter how somebody else's power is overthrown, and it doesn't matter how your own power is enhanced. Those moral questions are irrelevant. Power is all that matters. Not morality, not character, not truth, just power. And power in your hands is virtuous no matter what you do with it. Whilst power in the hands of others is evil no matter what they do with it. Meanwhile, if they talk of civility, respectability and virtue, then that is evil, because they have power. If you're talking of killing, of profanity, of violence and of destruction, then that is virtuous, because power in your hands is good, no matter what. Power in the hands of others is wicked, no matter what. This is a thoroughly self-righteous position to take. It's actually narcissistic in its self-righteousness. But the trick is very simple. Get yourself into one of the designated victim groups that's been created by this worldview, and you can do whatever you like whilst being totally justified. Are you female? Are you black? Are you transgender? Are you gay? Are you disabled? Are you a combination of the above? Even better, then you lack privilege. That's your problem. And you are therefore cleansed of all unrighteousness. You are free to hate others for their privilege and any of the attendant wickedness you believe they are responsible for as a result. Mona says in the quotes that I just read that she lacks privilege. And she repeatedly refers to her gender and her race throughout to say, I lack privilege. But here's the thing, she doesn't lack privilege. She was born into a country where 1/3 of the people are living in extreme poverty. But her parents were well-to-do medical researchers with PhDs who received government grants to work in places like the United Kingdom. She won the jackpot of Egyptian life. She lives now in a trendy part of New York, one of the most expensive places to live in the world, and she travels the world as a career choice. And all of this she can manage whilst working for herself as a freelancer, making her own way in the world, seemingly without any shackles of oppression to hold her back and prevent her from occupying that unbelievably globally privileged position. Why is she pretending to be underprivileged so ardently? Well, not only that, not only is she actually privileged, but she's using the very means that she condemns, which is violence. She is a privileged advocate of violence. Her own worldview says that that's a wicked thing. This worldview, you see, makes me so righteous as a member of a designated underprivileged group that I am not even capable of hypocrisy. I can do whatever I want. I am absolved. You can do anything at all, and you are the perpetuator of wickedness. It externalizes every shred of evil. Hypocrisy not even possible. I asked the question, what game is she playing? Well, I answered that already. Power. That is the only currency worth having in this worldview. That is the lens through which everything anyone ever does, especially men like me, is interpreted. This very discussion that I'm having now would be violence to Mona. Why? Because of who I am. This is violence oppressing and destroying the world and keeping feminists like her under, and she would be able to do anything at all right now, anything at all to stop this discussion from taking place, and she would be morally justified. Now, interestingly, she doesn't do anything at all because the conscience that she has is written there by the finger of God himself, and it prevents her from doing anything at all, as does the justice system of our society. But she should be able to do anything because I'm a perpetuator of violence no matter what I say. So here is a woman for whom the bitter fruit of postmodern thinking has run its full course. Now, one of the chief articulators of postmodernism was a guy called Jacques Derrida, and I've said this before. He made it very, very clear that his target, the thing he wanted to destroy, the thing he wanted those who think after him in the future to disregard and attack, was the Logos. Now, put aside the spiritual implication of that for a second. Let's look at just what that means practically in the context of John 1, apart from Jesus, the concept, but also what Derrida meant by it, apart from Jesus, the concept of Logos. That is the thing that ties the whole world together. That is the objective truth that exists outside of me, outside of you, and it is an objective truth that is shared by you and shared by me. It's an objective truth that we all answer to in the same way. It's an objective truth that we all live by in the same way, and it's an objective truth that you and I can both discover because it applies to both of us and it's the reality we both exist in. Now, that's just the way a lot of us think by nature. We don't have to articulate that. To say it kind of sounds weird because you're like, well, duh. However, that's not the postmodern way of thinking. And in fact, most people under 35 are affected by the postmodern way of thinking, and they don't truly believe that, whether by what they say or just sometimes by what they do. Because Derrida said, no, that's not real. He said, firstly, truth isn't real. But secondly, he said, by saying that, you realize that logos is the root word of dialogue. Why? Well, because dialoguing, me talking to you, assumes that you and I have something in common. We can reason out our differences. We can talk about a disagreement. We can talk about an issue we have, and by talking about it, we can actually reason up together to some truth point and resolve our difference. Because you and I both share an existence in the same truth. Now, postmodernism says, no, that's not true. That's wrong. And in fact, you can't dialogue, because there is no such thing as truth. You better not talk to people about your differences. You've only got one thing that you can do about your differences. You are an exponent of your tribe, woman, black, man, etc., and you're stuck there, and you are either evil or virtuous depending on your position in that structure, and all you have to do is wage war against the other tribes for what? Well, I'll say it again, power. When truth is dead, only power remains. That's the sum total of this. We're seeing the bitter fruit of this postmodern thinking play out before our very eyes, and it's ugly. You tune into Q&A, you go on YouTube and find a copy of the episode. It's ugly. Ugly women, ugly ideas, and ugly behaviour. And I don't say that like, ha, you have a funny shaped nose, you're ugly. Not like that, it's not crass. I mean, this worldview is ugly and it makes people into ugly exponents of the worldview. I would say the same of a group of men who are sitting there engaging in that kind of behaviour, saying those kinds of things, inciting that kind of violence, and speaking in that kind of way to be worthy of condemnation. It'd be worthy, it would be vulgar. Can you imagine a world built on this stuff? A world of resentment, of anger, of self-righteousness, of hatred, of violence, of division, of tribal hostility, of conflict, of irreconcilable differences, and genuinely irreconcilable. You can't talk to each other. This is, by the way, why Extinction Rebellion and Antifa and all these groups are violent. They don't believe in talking. If you're up there and you're speaking, you're an oppressor of the helpless and the weak, and you need to be destroyed. And whatever they do to destroy you is morally justified. And whatever you're doing, even if you're promoting virtue, is wicked and evil because you're oppressing them by speaking, and you need to be no platform, you need to be shut down. Power, power, power. Class warfare, differences, hostility, division, anger, resentment, and hate. Of course, they accuse us of that. But it's interesting, you say that old saying, methinketh the lady doth protest too much, or the man doth protest too much. That's a really good saying because it basically plays into the fact that, well, maybe you've got a problem with that. And there's a bit of that going on here. Identity politics is the gospel of hatred. It actually asks the question, why is there evil in the world? And it answers that question by saying, simply, purely because of others. It asks the question, how can we solve the problem of evil? And it answers it by saying, by destroying others and having my way. But what about these alternative answers? How can we solve the problem of evil? What about this answer? By changing myself and doing my part. Why is there evil in the world? Well, because the world is full of people who are human beings in sin, just like me. That's why I need to change myself and do my part. That's the only thing in my direct control. Why are the nations in strife? Why are societies in strife? Because nations and societies are the individual writ large. And I can't even stay out of strife in my life with other people, let alone a whole society of me's. Sin starts at home. And this is the thing. Mona, people of this worldview, you are a sinner. As am I. And the salvation that you crave is not found in the refuge of your race and your gender. Your identity, the inner exponent of who you are, will not cleanse you. There is no peace to be found there. In fact, quite the opposite, as you can see from the manifestation of this. No peace, that's for sure. Your salvation is to be found outside of yourself. Your salvation is to be found in Jesus Christ, who can transform you from the inside out to make you a blessing to others and a light in, yes, a world that you have acknowledged is dark, without the violence. And of course, the great tragedy of this worldview is that you are enslaved to identity, and character and change becomes totally out of reach. But character is the great answer, not power. And character, here's the thing, is equally accessible to every person, regardless of their privilege. And I say this, do you feel underprivileged? Do you feel like a victim? These are feelings that overwhelm us all from time to time, and we can give into it easily. But here's the thing, what does God say? I look on the heart. I look on the character. I look on the inner person. I look on who you are in your character and your person and your heart. That's what matters. And do you know what? Good character is accessible to every single person equally, regardless of privilege, regardless of status, regardless of intersectionality, as they call it, regardless of your tribe or creed or color or gender. And the main way that that character comes to you is because Jesus Christ is ready to save every single person from the sin I described, regardless of their privilege, and give them a heart upon which he can stamp his own character and grow you into it. See, a person of good character will use whatever privileges they have for good. A man of good character does not rape. You don't need to kill men. You need men to be of good character. They do not engage in violence. He uses what he has in the service of others for their good, and he has great assets to be used for that end, as only men can. Likewise, a woman of character equally doesn't engage in violence, and she doesn't gossip and slander and cause strife and divide. She uses what she has in the service of others for their good, and she has great assets in the service of others for their good that only a woman can have. Character is everything, and it is found in the truth of the Logos, Jesus Christ, who Jacques Derrida said from the beginning he wanted out of Western society. We find true character in him made available equally to every single one of us. Now I want to draw a pencil line right there. I was going to end, but I added another note here because there's a great character study, well, a great study of a character in the Bible, I should say, not the character in the sense I was just referring to, in Jonah. This is a story of a man who makes himself a victim. And he's a man who actually enjoyed tremendous grace from God. He was saved from drowning and from certain death despite his disobedience. He was a Jew with all the privileges that carried as one of God's chosen people. He had all these things that he became blind to because all the while he's despising the privileges that God has given to others. He rages over the grace of God on the Ninevites because God brings them to repentance and salvation. He throws a temper tantrum and he's filled with resentment and hostility and anger. And he's actually engaging in a form of identity politics. He hates the privileged Ninevites and doesn't believe that they should be raised up to that position at, apparently the expense of him somehow. He thinks he's a victim. He's been forced to go where he doesn't want to go. He's forced to watch the blessing of others. He's forced to love his enemies. He gets a sunburnt head because the random plant that he liked died, which God put there in the first place. And he says, yes, I'm right to be angry, he says to God, because he believes that the world is against him. And see how that is such an ugly existence. Blind, totally blind to the grace of God that's been lavished upon him and the souls of thousands that are being saved all around him. He's become blind to goodness itself. How destructive is this worldview of self-righteousness and resentment? We must avoid these things at all costs, which are popping up in our culture more and more on every hand. And you say, well, how can I live as someone who is never in this trap of victimhood and underprivilege, etc.? I'll tell you how. The mercy of Christ. The mercy of Christ means that you and me can never, ever be victims because we have known ultimate grace. We have known ultimate blessing from God himself. And we've been asked to carry that into, yes, a world that's dark, as the Marxists and the feminists and so on agree, but carry the character of Jesus Christ. Now that mercy means you're no victim, you're a light in the world. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, then make sure to hit the like button. If you want to never miss another video again, make sure to subscribe, or you can right now watch more videos right here. Cheers.